April 1945. Across Europe, the empire that once promised to last 1,000 years was disintegrating by the hour. The Red Army had broken through the Oder Line and was closing in on Berlin. American forces had crossed the Rhine and were carving through the industrial heartland of Germany. The Reich, starved of fuel, ammunition, and hope, was bleeding to death. Inside the burning cities and collapsing ministries, a different kind of battle was being waged, not for victory, but for disappearance. Trains left under cover of night, convoys of trucks slipped through back roads, and coded orders whispered through crackling radios. Somewhere within that chaos, the seeds of one of history's greatest modern mysteries were planted. The legend of a train that vanished beneath the earth, carrying the stolen wealth of a dying empire. No official document records its departure. No manifest lists its cargo. Yet, scattered across post-war testimonies, intercepted messages, and fragments of rumor, a story emerges, a story too detailed, too persistent, and too tantalizing to dismiss. It begins in Lower Silesia in the final spring of the war, when the Reich was turning its plunder inward for safekeeping. For 6 years, Nazi occupation forces had stripped the continent bare. Gold from national reserves, jewels from private collections, and priceless art from the museums of Warsaw, Paris, and Vienna had poured into Germany by the ton. By 1945, the Reichsbank's vaults were overflowing, and the treasures of a continent lay in crates marked with black eagles and swastikas. But as Allied bombers flattened cities and Soviet tanks advanced westward, the Nazi hierarchy began to understand that the end was inevitable. Their last mission was not to defend Germany, but to hide what it had stolen. In February 1945, Gauleiter Karl Hanke, the Nazi governor of Lower Silesia, issued an extraordinary order. Certain valuables were to be removed from Wrocław, then called Breslau, and transported west to prevent their capture. Breslau had been declared a fortress city, destined to resist to the last man. But Hanke, a fanatic loyal to Hitler, also understood the practical meaning of defeat. Witnesses would later claim that in the weeks following his order, trains began to arrive at Breslau's freight yards under heavy SS guard. The contents of these trains were hidden behind canvas and steel, but the rumors among railway workers were impossible to suppress. Each car, they whispered, carried not weapons or ammunition, but boxes stamped with bank seals, gold bullion, jewels, documents, and art. The convoys unloaded under floodlights and reloaded again at night. One train, longer than any other, stood sealed on a siding for days, surrounded by armed guards with orders to shoot anyone who approached. By mid-April, Soviet artillery was within range of the city. On the night of the 18th, according to accounts gathered decades later, that armored train rolled out of Breslau under blackout conditions. Its destination was west, toward the Owl Mountains, a remote region riddled with tunnels, mines, and newly blasted underground complexes. That region, codenamed Reis, Giant, was one of the most secret construction projects of the Third Reich. Forced laborers from concentration camps had spent 2 years carving vast chambers into the mountains of Lower Silesia. Officially, they were meant for underground factories and Führer headquarters. Unofficially, no one outside the SS ever knew exactly what they were building. The entrances were camouflaged, the blueprints destroyed. It was toward those tunnels that the mysterious train was said to be heading. Eyewitnesses would later recall the thunder of steel wheels in the night, the smell of oil and hot brakes, and the metallic echo of a locomotive passing through forested valleys. Somewhere between Breslau and Walbersich, the train vanished. The official Soviet record of the advance makes no mention of such a convoy. The railway archives list nothing unusual. Yet, in the first chaotic weeks after the war, Polish villagers told Allied investigators of sealed tunnels, collapsed entrances, and German engineers who refused to leave the region. Some spoke of explosions in the mountains, as though entire passageways had been deliberately destroyed. When Soviet occupation forces took control of Lower Silesia, they immediately sealed off sections of the rail network and underground sites. Local witnesses who approached were detained. Others simply disappeared. The Red Army's trophy brigades began cataloging treasures taken from Germany, but no one ever saw a detailed inventory from Silesia. Decades later, Russian archives would remain silent on what was found there. By the 1950s, the story had already entered European folklore. In mining towns, old men spoke of German engineers who returned after the war, bribing locals to show them disused shafts. Children played near collapsed tunnels said to hide the train's remains. Every few years, someone would claim to have seen a sealed steel door in the forest or a ventilation shaft covered by rubble. Each claim ended the same way, with authorities denying everything and silence returning to the mountains. The legend persisted because it had all the ingredients of truth. The Nazis had indeed moved their looted wealth through Silesia. Trains loaded with gold and art had been documented elsewhere, in Austria, in Bavaria, in Czechoslovakia. Entire convoys had disappeared in the confusion of retreat. Why not one more? Modern historians argue over details, but one fact remains undisputed. In April 1945, a heavily guarded train left Breslau heading southwest and was never seen again. The idea of a hidden Nazi treasure train might sound like fantasy, but the physical landscape of the Owl Mountains tells another story. The complex of tunnels beneath Walbrzich is real, miles of concrete chambers carved with meticulous precision. When Poland opened some of the sites to the public in the 1990s, explorers found rusted rail tracks leading into bricked-up walls, massive steel doors frozen in place, and ventilation shafts sealed with concrete thicker than a tank's armor. What was buried there and why remains a question that has haunted historians, treasure hunters, and governments for 70 years. Some believe the train carried the Reichsbank's gold reserve, worth billions in today's currency. Others think it contained priceless art stolen from Poland, including the missing panels of the Amber Room. A few suggest darker cargo, secret documents, experimental weapons, even human remains. No one knows for sure. But the story of that train, disappearing into the earth as the world collapsed above it, has never let go of the imagination of those who hear it. The final days of the war ended with the silence of tunnels and the echo of wheels fading into darkness, the sound of an empire burying its secrets beneath stone. The war ended not with parades in Silesia, but with silence. When the guns stopped in May 1945, the valleys around Walbrzich lay broken and emptied. German civilians fled west. Soviet soldiers filled the void. The Red Army came as both liberators and scavengers, armed with orders from Moscow to seize anything of value left by the Reich. What they found, or claimed not to find, would shape the mystery for decades. The Soviet occupation of Lower Silesia was absolute. Rail lines were cut off from the rest of Poland, checkpoints sprouted overnight, and locals were forbidden from approaching the mountains without permission. In the first weeks of control, Soviet engineering units swarmed the region. Witnesses in nearby villages later recalled convoys of trucks entering the forest roads near Kasiez Castle and Soban Mountain. At night, engines rumbled underground. During the day, smoke rose from new explosions echoing through the hills. Then, suddenly, the troops vanished as quickly as they had come. When Polish authorities eventually regained partial access, they found sealed tunnels, freshly poured concrete walls, and collapsed shafts where rail tracks disappeared beneath the earth. No official Soviet report ever described what was done there. Requests for documentation vanished into bureaucratic voids. To this day, Russian archives contain no reference to a gold train, but the same silence hangs over numerous wartime recovery operations whose details remain classified. The new Polish settlers who moved into the abandoned German towns inherited not only ruined homes, but stories whispered by those who had stayed behind. An elderly station worker in Walbrzych spoke of German trains that had arrived loaded and guarded just before the Soviets came. Another claimed he saw SS officers supervising miners at night, forcing them to blast tunnels and install massive doors. For years, these accounts were dismissed as post-war invention, until small physical clues began surfacing. In 1946, a team clearing debris near the old rail line between Walbrzych and Wrocław uncovered a stretch of rusted track leading into what appeared to be a collapsed tunnel. The Soviets quickly intervened, sealing the site and forbidding further excavation. The local engineer who reported it later disappeared, his name removed from employment lists. Other witnesses followed similar patterns: sudden transfers, unexplained accidents, missing files. The message was clear. Some secrets from the war were to remain buried. Through the 1950s and 60s, Poland's communist government showed little interest in wartime legends that might attract Western curiosity. But underground, the story survived. Miners digging in new coal seams occasionally struck reinforced concrete, unlike any standard mine support. Some swore they found rails deep below active shafts, perfectly preserved. Others described ventilation shafts filled with concrete thick as armor, impossible to breach without military equipment. By 1970, rumors had grown into obsession. Journalists, amateur historians, and treasure hunters began tracing old German maps, convinced that beneath the Owl Mountains lay not just factories, but the spoils of a collapsing empire. One name appeared again and again: Project Reese, Giant. Officially a construction program for underground headquarters, it remained incomplete at war's end. Its tunnels were immense, its purpose uncertain, and its proximity to the supposed route of the lost train undeniable. The communist authorities attempted to contain the speculation. In 1973, the Ministry of Mining conducted limited surveys near Kasayas Castle. Geophysical readings showed voids beneath the hillside, but excavation was halted after 2 workers died in a cave-in. The official report labeled the voids natural cavities, though surviving engineers privately admitted the geometry looked man-made. The data vanished into state archives, never published. Outside Poland, Western intelligence quietly noted the same rumors. Declassified British documents mention unverified reports of concealed transport of valuables, Breslau-Waldenburg sector. American OSS files echo similar phrases, linking the area to looted art from the general government of occupied Poland. Yet even these agencies, flush with captured German records, never located the train. The Cold War made deeper inquiry impossible. Silesia lay behind the Iron Curtain, its forests patrolled by militia. Only in whispers did the legend grow. Stories of Soviet engineers digging at night, of freight wagons unearthed then buried again, of mysterious lights flickering above sealed shafts. To locals, it became a part of the landscape, unseen but always present, a buried heart still pulsing beneath the mountains. By the 1980s, a generation raised under communism knew the tale as folklore. But in 1985, a former Wehrmacht officer living in Bavaria reignited the fire. In an interview for a German television documentary, he claimed to have personally supervised the loading of gold and valuables onto a train in Breslau that April. "It went to the mountains," he said, "to tunnels built for the Führer. We never saw it again." His name was unimportant, his story was impossible to verify. Yet it reached Poland through shortwave broadcasts, where miners listening in their dormitories heard the words and felt the hairs on their arms rise. After the fall of communism in 1989, Poland opened its archives and its hills to exploration. For the first time in 40 years, independent researchers could walk the old tracks with maps in hand. They found rusted switch mechanisms buried under soil, railway embankments ending abruptly against rock, and heavy timbers protruding from collapsed shafts. None of it proved the train existed, but every discovery deepened the mystery. In 1991, the new Polish Geological Institute scanned portions of the Wałbrzych rail corridor using ground-penetrating radar. Their report mentioned anomalous cavities at depths consistent with tunnel structures. Again, funding ran out before any excavation began. Political turmoil and lack of resources forced the project into silence. The legend's power came not from proof, but from absence. Every silence became evidence, every sealed door a promise. People began to speak of the gold train not as a rumor, but as an inevitability, a relic waiting for the right hands to uncover it. By the early 2000s, the story had grown global. Expedition groups arrived from Germany, the UK, and the US, armed with sonar, drones, and permits to search specific coordinates. Local governments alternated between encouragement and caution, wary of accidents or diplomatic complications. Still, the mountains kept their secrets. And then, in 2015, the world's attention returned to Wałbrzych. 2 treasure hunters, one Polish, one German, announced they had discovered radar images showing a 100-meter-long metallic object buried along the old railway line, precisely where legend placed the missing train. International media descended overnight. Helicopters circled the forest. Scientists, journalists, and fortune seekers camped at the site, convinced history was about to be rewritten. For a few shining weeks, the promise of the gold train seemed within reach. But just as in 1945, the story ended in silence. August 2015. 70 years after the fall of the Third Reich, the quiet industrial town of Wałbrzych found itself at the center of world attention. For decades, the story of the hidden train had been confined to dusty archives and campfire tales. But now, 2 men claimed to have proof, scientific proof, that the legend was real. Piotr Koper, a Polish builder, and Andreas Richter, a German treasure hunter, stood before reporters and declared that they had located the long-lost Nazi gold train using ground-penetrating radar. According to them, beneath a wooded embankment near kilometer 65 of the old Wrocław-Wałbrzych line lay a metallic object more than 100 meters long, perfectly shaped like a train, sealed under meters of earth and rock. They even released blurry radar images showing elongated outlines and voids, enough to ignite a media storm unlike anything Poland had seen in years. The claim hit headlines within hours. "Nazi gold train found," screamed newspapers from Warsaw to London. Television crews arrived by the dozens, filling hotels in Walbrzych and turning the forest road into a carnival of cameras, scientists, and fortune seekers. For the first time, the world saw the mountains of Lower Silesia not as a forgotten frontier, but as the potential resting place of billions in lost treasure. Koper and Richter said they had discovered the object while researching wartime railway maps. Satellite data revealed a small, abandoned spur leading toward a hillside. Local legend claimed a train had disappeared there during the last days of the war. When their radar scans showed dense metal signatures beneath the slope, the two men contacted authorities. Poland's government responded with caution, but also excitement. The Ministry of Culture confirmed that a train-shaped anomaly had been detected. Deputy Minister Piotr Zuchowski told reporters, "I am more than 99% sure the train exists." That single sentence electrified the world. Within weeks, archaeologists, geologists, and military engineers descended on Walbrzych. Excavation permits were issued, security cordons erected, and the forest transformed into a modern dig site. Soldiers set up tents and floodlights. Ground sensors mapped magnetic fields. Drones scanned from above. The air buzzed with speculation. What lay beneath? Nazi gold? Priceless art? Secret weapons? Or just empty rock? Local residents watched in disbelief as their quiet region became a gold rush frontier. Tourists sold gold train t-shirts and souvenirs. Restaurants renamed dishes after Hitler's engineers. Overnight, the hills of Lower Silesia turned into a living monument to obsession. But behind the spectacle, genuine scientific work began. The University of Science and Technology in Krakow was tasked with verifying the radar data. Experts studied soil density, electromagnetic signatures, and historical maps. They noted that the radar image could indicate man-made cavities, but not necessarily a train. The excitement began to cool. When the official survey report arrived in December 2015, it was a blow to believers. The university concluded that the anomaly was not consistent with a train, but rather a geological formation, a natural pocket of rock and clay. Yet the data also showed unexplained linear shapes and density contrasts that couldn't be easily dismissed. The debate exploded again. Was it science or sabotage? For months, speculation overshadowed reason. Television anchors debated the moral question: if treasure existed, who would own it? Poland? The heirs of Holocaust victims? The Russian state? The German government? Legal scholars dusted off international treaties while investors offered funding for deeper digs. The story of 1945 had been reborn, carried not by soldiers but by scientists and dreamers chasing ghosts through the earth. By mid-2016, authorities approved a small excavation. Heavy machinery arrived under military supervision. As excavators tore into the hillside, crowds gathered behind barriers, cameras streaming live. Each meter of soil peeled away decades of speculation. Day after day, diggers found only sand, gravel, and rusted fragments of post-war metal. No rails, no tunnel, no train. After 10 days, the work stopped. The pit was silent. Beneath the forest lay only the stubborn stone of Silesia, or so the official statement claimed. The Ministry of Culture declared the legend unproven. The site was closed. But not everyone accepted the verdict. Koper and Richter maintained that the excavation had stopped too soon. Their radar data, they said, indicated the object lay deeper, 12 to 15 meters below the surface, beyond the reach of that shallow dig. "We know it's there," Koper told reporters. "We've seen what the instrument saw." Yet the following year, they returned independently with private funding. Using new radar systems and drilling rigs, they collected soil cores from deeper levels. What they found reignited the debate. Traces of unnatural metallic alloys, the kind used in 1940s armored plating, embedded in layers of soil untouched since the war. The samples were small, corroded, and inconclusive. But they were enough to reopen the question. By now, the legend had evolved into a global phenomenon. Documentaries aired on the History Channel, Discovery, and BBC News. Internet forums dissected every photograph, comparing shadows on radar prints like theologians studying scripture. Historians warned that the frenzy risked overshadowing real research on Nazi plunder, much of which remained missing. Yet for millions, the gold train had become more than a story. It was a symbol of the past's unfinished business. The human drive to believe, to unearth, to find something lost, proved stronger than evidence. Even after official reports closed the case, private expeditions continued to comb the mountains with magnetometers and drones. Some claimed to detect sealed tunnels, others claimed government cover-ups. Each theory fed the next, looping endlessly like the train's own ghostly circuit beneath the hills. In the years that followed, the forest reclaimed the excavation site. Grass grew over the trenches, birds nested where cameras once stood. Yet the silence seemed temporary, like the calm before something shifts below the surface. The legend remained, immune to proof or denial, because somewhere in the archives of forgotten nations, boxes still hold documents, stamped Geheime Reichssache, top secret of the Reich, that detail movements of convoys in April 1945 through the Silesian rail corridor. The routes matched the very tracks where Koper and Richter had searched. And so the question lingered. If there was no train, why do the maps still show a siding that ends against solid rock? Why were Soviet engineers seen detonating charges there after the war? Why did witnesses speak of explosions echoing through the night and rail cars rolling into darkness, never to return? The mystery refused to die because history itself provided the motive. In the final weeks of a collapsing empire, nothing was more precious than secrecy, and nothing easier to hide than a train beneath the mountains of chaos. To understand the legend of the Nazi gold train, you must first understand the obsession that gave birth to it, the Nazi obsession with control, secrecy, and the illusion of permanence. By 1945, that illusion was collapsing, but within the administrative chaos of the dying Reich, one truth remained constant. Nothing of value was to fall into enemy hands. Across the territories Germany still held, entire bureaucracies were devoted to the concealment of wealth. The Reichsbank, once the proud financial engine of Europe's new order, had become a clearinghouse of plunder. From the vaults of conquered nations came shipments of bullion and currency, stacked in wooden crates marked with false inventory codes. Jewelry, rare coins, and artworks were catalogued under cover names. By the spring of 1945, so much stolen material had passed through its hands that even its own officials no longer knew what was real and what was fiction. Berlin's order to evacuate this wealth reached Silesia in February. The reasoning was simple. As the front collapsed, the mountainous terrain of Lower Silesia offered both concealment and a network of tunnels already under SS control. There, in the Owl Mountains, the Reich had invested staggering resources into what it called Project Ries, Project Giant. The project had begun in 1943 under the supervision of the organization Todt, Hitler's construction corps. At first, it appeared to be just another fortified complex, a place for weapons production safe from Allied bombers. But the deeper they dug, the stranger the project became. Witnesses described enormous chambers carved into solid rock, some as large as cathedrals, linked by kilometers of tunnels wide enough for rail tracks. Tens of thousands of forced laborers, many from the nearby Gross-Rosen concentration camp, toiled under unimaginable conditions. Few survived. Their work created a labyrinth that to this day has never been fully mapped. Concrete walls, air shafts, rail spurs, and power conduits hint at an unfinished underground city. Its purpose, historians now suspect, extended far beyond a factory. Captured documents after the war refer obliquely to Object Ries, Object Soban, and Object Balbuelod. These were code names for sectors within the project, each a separate underground fortress. Most were never completed, but their locations align eerily with the supposed route of the gold train. In early 1945, as Soviet artillery grew closer, SS logistics officers began shipping crates from Breslau toward these construction sites. Some trains were documented, carrying machine parts, archives, and provisions. Others were not. Among those unlisted shipments may have been the last desperate transfer of Reichsbank treasure. One file, recovered in 1946 from a burned SS depot in Dresden, contained a memo referencing Transport 77A to Ries, Security Level 4. The memo was unsigned and undated, but it mentioned cargo requiring armed escort and final concealment. No other record of Transport 77A has ever surfaced. Historians debate whether it referred to a train, a convoy of trucks, or even something more abstract. But its timing, spring 1945, and its destination Ries, fit the pattern perfectly. The SS officer overseeing security in the region was General Hans Kammler, a name that recurs like a shadow throughout the Reich's final months. Kammler had overseen secret weapons projects, including the V-2 rocket program. Ruthless, brilliant, and loyal only to power, he controlled both the slave laborers and the construction resources of Project Ries. In the final weeks of the war, Kammler vanished without trace. His fate, like that of the train, has never been conclusively explained. Some reports claim he surrendered to American forces in Austria, trading secrets for protection. Others suggest he was executed by his own men. Still others insist he escaped to South America, carrying with him the keys to the Reich's buried assets. What is certain is that Kammler had both the authority and the means to hide a trainload of valuables within the labyrinth he commanded. Polish and German historians examining post-war archives in the 1990s discovered strange inconsistencies in Kammler's area of operations. Construction blueprints for Ries stop abruptly in April 1945, replaced by requisitions for closing materials: concrete, detonators, steel doors. In one requisition, the entry for door thickness reads 1.5 meters, more than 5 feet of solid steel. Why would a factory need doors that thick? When post-war engineers surveyed the tunnels, they found some sections suddenly terminating in bricked walls that rang hollow when struck. Behind at least one, magnetometer readings suggested the presence of heavy metal, not ore, but manufactured steel. Yet government orders prevented any destructive testing, citing safety and heritage protection laws. Those walls remain sealed today. Meanwhile, evidence of mass transport movements through Silesia in the war's final days continued to emerge. German railway records recovered from archives in Oppol list several ghost trains, convoys assigned departure numbers but never logged as arriving anywhere. One entry from April 18, 1945, describes a train leaving Breslau with 24 wagons of special cargo and priority clearance. Its route terminated at kilometer 65, precisely the location where Koper and Richter's radar scans later detected anomalies. Skeptics argue that such coincidences prove nothing. The rail line was heavily used, many records were destroyed, but taken together, the missing train manifests, the sealed tunnels, Kammler's disappearance, they form a chain of circumstantial evidence too coherent to ignore. By the early 2000s, a new generation of historians began re-evaluating Nazi logistics during the collapse. Using declassified Allied intelligence, they traced a network of emergency storage depots codenamed Verlagerungslager, relocation warehouses. Most contained military hardware. A few contained art and currency. In 1945, several were ordered emptied and consolidated in Lower Silesia. Why Silesia? Because it lay on the escape route toward the Alps, Hitler's mythical last redoubt, and was still under firm German control until late April. The terrain was defensible, the tunnel systems ideal for concealment, and the chaos perfect for erasing records. If you wanted to hide a fortune and ensure no one found it for generations, there was no better place. Even Allied investigators suspected as much. The American T-Force units sent to secure scientific and financial assets after the war searched Silesia, but were repeatedly blocked by Soviet forces. The Russians insisted they had already cleared the area. Yet no inventory of what they supposedly recovered was ever released. In a Cold War built on secrecy, missing gold was just another weapon. Project Ries became a ghost within a ghost, an unfinished underground empire concealing a final act of desperation. Every tunnel sealed, every document missing, every name erased seemed to whisper the same question. What was buried beneath the mountains when the world above was burning? For decades, the answer has hovered between history and myth. But to those who have walked the dark corridors of Ries, the sense of design, of purpose, is unmistakable. These were not mere mines or shelters. They were vaults. Vaults built for something meant to outlast defeat. In the years that followed the war, Silesia became a frontier of silence, a place where stories outlived those who told them. Beneath the forests and valleys, the tunnels of Project Ries lay undisturbed, their entrances sealed with rubble and time. The world outside moved on. Germany rebuilt. Poland changed governments. The Iron Curtain descended across Europe. But inside the mountains, the mystery of the train endured, guarded not by soldiers or laws, but by fear and rumor. For decades, ordinary miners and railway workers were the only ones who ventured near the forgotten sites. Many refused to speak of what they saw. Those who did offered fragments, glimpses that never quite aligned but never fully contradicted one another. They told of sealed steel doors welded shut from the inside, of echoing chambers that seemed to stretch far beyond mapped tunnels, of machinery so large it must have been built underground. Some stories were darker. In 1953, a group of young Polish miners exploring near Soban Mountain stumbled upon a narrow passage that led into an older tunnel system. They followed it until they reached a massive wall of poured concrete, smooth as glass and cold to the touch. As they examined it, the ground beneath them trembled faintly, as if something deeper below shifted. Terrified, they fled. 2 days later, when they returned with local authorities, the passage had collapsed. The incident was quietly recorded as a mine accident, and the site was declared unsafe. Throughout the 1960s, scattered rumors of Soviet teams operating in the mountains persisted. Witnesses recalled convoys of trucks under military escort, entering at dusk and leaving before dawn. Some said they heard drilling, others explosions muffled by the valley walls. Whatever the Soviets were doing, it left no trace except fresh mounds of soil and reinforced fencing. The official line was simple: geological surveys. But few believed it. By the 1970s, the Cold War had turned even myths into strategic currency. Both East and West collected intelligence not just on weapons, but on legends, any story that might conceal hidden technology or forgotten resources. In declassified CIA memos from the era, Project Rees appears alongside sites like Peenemünde and Nordhausen, locations tied to secret research. One document notes, Soviet engineering presence in Lower Silesia remains active, possible continued interest in subsurface structures. What the Soviets sought there, the file does not say. At the same time, independent treasure hunters began to reappear. Most were dismissed as dreamers, but a few were serious men, historians, engineers, and former soldiers who remembered the war's final weeks firsthand. They brought with them maps copied from archives, some marked with cryptic notations: Breslau evacuation route, Kilometer 65, Tunnel K3. One such man, a retired German railway officer named Otto Fuchs, claimed to have overseen cargo transports through Silesia in April 1945. In a 1975 interview, he stated that an armored train with valuables had been rerouted from Breslau to an undisclosed destination in the Owl Mountains. Within months of giving that interview, Fuchs died in what police described as a traffic collision. His notes vanished. Over time, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Those who got too close to the story, who claimed to have evidence or maps or inside knowledge, seemed to meet premature ends. In 1981, a Polish historian researching Risa reportedly fell from a scaffolding inside one of the tunnels. His colleagues later found his notes missing, along with rolls of film from his camera. A decade later, an engineer studying anomalies near Walbrzych died in a house fire ruled accidental, though neighbors insisted they heard footsteps outside minutes before the blaze began. To skeptics, these were coincidences, the unfortunate fates of men chasing phantoms. To believers, they were warnings. The gold train was not merely a legend, it was a secret still being guarded. The end of communism in 1989 opened the floodgates. With archives unsealed and borders relaxed, journalists and adventurers from around the world poured into Silesia. They found a landscape haunted by its own history. Sias Castle, once used by the SS as a command center, still contained hidden chambers and walled-off passages. Beneath its foundations, surveyors discovered staircases that led nowhere and shafts descending into uncharted depths. Each discovery fueled another round of speculation. Poland's new democratic government, eager to attract tourism and investment, began to cautiously encourage exploration. Some tunnels of Project Rees were open to the public as historical monuments. Visitors walked through cold corridors where the walls still bore tool marks from 1944, the air heavy with moisture and memory. Guides spoke of the gold train in hushed tones, not as fact, but as possibility. The line between history and legend blurred completely. Yet among academics, a quieter investigation was unfolding. In the archives of Berlin, Warsaw, and Moscow, historians began cross-referencing wartime logistics records with post-war intelligence reports. What they found did not prove the train's existence, but it proved the context was real. Hundreds of shipments of valuables had been evacuated from eastern Germany in the final months of the war. Many were accounted for. Some were not. Among those unaccounted were tons of gold reserves from Breslau, crates of confiscated art, and at least one convoy labeled Reichsbank Special Cargo. And there was something else, a cluster of Soviet intelligence files referencing Operation Convoy. Dated from the late 1940s, the documents described an ongoing search for missing German transports in Silesia. The Soviets believed that enemy material of high strategic value had been hidden there, though the nature of that material was never specified. One line, redacted in later releases, mentioned armored cargo under mountain protection. If the Soviets had found something, they kept it secret. But their relentless presence in the region for years after the war raises an unsettling question. What were they guarding or removing? Hula! By the turn of the millennium, the mystery had become almost self-sustaining. Each new claim drew skeptics, each denial drew believers. The legend had outgrown history and entered myth, but a myth anchored by enough truth to keep the search alive. Even now, old men in the villages of Walbrzych still tell stories their fathers once whispered. That on a night in April 1945, the earth trembled as a train passed through the valley under blackout, its cars sealed and silent. They say the sound came only once and was never heard again. By the beginning of the 21st century, the legend of the Nazi gold train had entered a new age, one powered not by whispers in mining towns, but by digital screens and satellite images. What had once been the domain of soldiers and historians was now being pursued by engineers, drone operators, and independent researchers armed with tools that the original treasure hunters could only dream of. Technology had changed everything. With the arrival of high-resolution ground-penetrating radar, thermal imaging, and precise geological mapping, the mountains of Lower Silesia could finally be scanned layer by layer, meter by meter. And as the tools improved, so did the confidence of those who believed the story was more than myth. In the early 2000s, Polish universities began quiet collaborations with geological institutes to remap the underground systems beneath the Owl Mountains. Officially, these studies were focused on water flow and mine stability, but the reports often hinted at deeper interests. Surveyors discovered unexpected voids beneath known tunnels, cavities with sharp geometric boundaries, suggesting human construction. Some were filled with sediment and water, others seemed completely sealed. The data stopped short of naming what lay inside, but the patterns were unmistakable. Private exploration groups soon joined in. Former engineers, archaeologists, and military veterans began forming small teams, funding expeditions through investors and online forums. They scoured wartime maps, analyzed aerial reconnaissance photographs taken by the Allies in 1944, and compared them with modern satellite imagery. In several locations, the alignment of vanished sidings and disturbed earth matched the path of the old Walbrzych Railway. What made these modern expeditions different was not just technology, it was persistence. These were people who treated the legend not as fantasy, but as an unresolved data problem. They collected soil samples, scanned magnetic fields, even brought portable muon detectors, the same tools used to scan Egyptian pyramids, to peer beneath the mountains. Each time, the readings hinted at cavities. Each time, official access was denied or funding ran dry. In 2015, when the announcement of the supposed discovery made headlines, it felt like the culmination of decades of anticipation. But even after the official excavation found nothing, the search did not stop. It simply changed shape. Where once there had been shovels and drills, there were now algorithms. Satellite archives were reanalyzed using AI pattern recognition to detect anomalies in terrain elevation, depressions or mounds consistent with collapsed tunnels. Heat maps of the region showed faint traces of airflow patterns, suggesting open space below ground. Engineers debated whether seismic readings from small tremors near Casillas Castle could indicate subsurface chambers shifting under time and pressure. Every discovery, however small, fed the story further, and where science and speculation met, money soon followed. Investors saw opportunity in mystery. Documentary networks, online media companies, and tourism promoters began funding new digs. In 2018, a privately funded operation began exploratory drilling at a site near the old rail line. Backed by European investors, the team bored narrow shafts deep into the hillside, lowering cameras and sensors into the voids below. They found layers of disturbed soil, and at 14 meters down, fragments of timber and rusted metal that appeared to form part of a buried structure. The images were murky, distorted by moisture, but unmistakably artificial. For weeks, excitement returned to Walbrzych. Local newspapers ran headlines echoing the frenzy of 2015. Officials promised transparency but urged patience. The discovery was real, they said, but it was too early to claim what it represented. The site was sealed for further study. Then, just as before, the story went quiet. The promised follow-up reports were never released. Funding evaporated. The investors withdrew. What caused the silence this time was never explained. Some whispered that the artifacts found belonged to a different period, post-war military material, perhaps Soviet. Others insisted the team had found something far older and been forced to stop by government order. As always, the lack of answers only deepened the mystery. Meanwhile, the gold train had become an economy unto itself. Local businesses in Walbrzich thrived on the legend. Tours of Project Reese sites filled buses every summer. Gift shops sold gold train coins, maps, and keychains. Restaurants offered Nazi treasure platters for tourists chasing ghosts through the forest. The town had found a way to live with the myth, to profit from it without ever proving it. Yet beneath the commercial surface, a quiet tension remained. Some locals resented the circus, believing the mountain should remain untouched, a graveyard of the past. Others believed the truth was being hidden, not by conspiracy, but by convenience. If a discovery was made, it might trigger claims from governments, museums, and victims' families around the world. The treasure, if real, would not belong to the finders. It would belong to history. International law complicates everything. Under UNESCO conventions, any recovered artifacts from Nazi plunder are subject to restitution. If the train carried valuables seized from occupied nations or Jewish families, the legal and moral responsibility would extend across continents. For many, the gold train had stopped being a hunt for wealth and become a hunt for justice, a way to recover what history tried to erase. But others see it differently. To them, the train represents not restitution, but survival, the last desperate attempt of a regime to preserve its power even as its cities burned. In that light, the search becomes something darker. Not a treasure hunt, but an autopsy of ambition. Even today, scanning teams continue to explore the valleys with drones and sensors, submitting reports to academic institutions and historical societies. None have confirmed the existence of a buried train, yet none have disproven it either. The terrain itself resists certainty, layers of rock, clay, and human interference concealing whatever truth remains below. And so, the gold train sits in that liminal space between history and hope, where evidence fades into legend. Every new scan, every excavation, every official denial keeps the story alive. For some, it's about treasure. For others, it's about closure. But for everyone drawn to the Owl Mountains, it's about the pull of something deeper, the need to know what lies beneath. The ground may one day give up its secret, or it may hold it forever, a silent monument to a time when men believed that by burying gold, they could bury their guilt with it. Every legend endures for a reason. Beneath the numbers, beneath the documents, beneath the metal and the stone, the story of the Nazi gold train is not just about what might be buried under the mountains. It's about what people have been searching for within themselves. For 80 years, this mystery has drawn soldiers, scholars, engineers, and dreamers into the same dark labyrinth. Some came for wealth, others for history, but all of them were chasing the same invisible promise, that truth, if found, might offer some kind of redemption. Yet history rarely offers redemption. It offers fragments, moments of clarity surrounded by silence. The gold train sits precisely in that silence. Every detail that can be proven leads to another that can't. Every photograph, every testimony, every archive record seems to stop one step before resolution, as if history itself refuses to speak. The human obsession with buried treasure is older than the story itself. It's an instinct that crosses cultures and centuries, a belief that somewhere beneath the earth lies not only fortune, but meaning. In the case of the Nazi gold train, that belief becomes something more complicated, because this treasure, if it exists, was never earned. It was stolen. It represents not triumph, but tragedy. The Reich's plunder of Europe was unprecedented. From 1939 to 1945, entire cultures were stripped bare, museums emptied, churches looted, families erased from the records along with their possessions. Gold teeth melted into ingots, heirlooms catalogued as state property. Every bar of gold that might lie beneath the Owl Mountains was once part of someone's life. That is what gives the story its weight. The search for the train is not just a hunt for lost wealth. It is an excavation of loss itself. For survivors and their descendants, the idea of recovering even a fraction of what was taken carries both hope and dread. Hope because justice might finally surface. Dread because reopening the past means reopening wounds that never healed. Some see the legend as a distraction, a spectacle built upon suffering. Others argue that confronting the mystery is the only way to keep memory alive. There is another layer, the moral question that shadows every treasure hunter who steps into the tunnels. What happens if they succeed? What would it mean to uncover the final cache of the Third Reich? To hold in one's hands the tangible remains of stolen dreams? Would it be victory or desecration? Psychologists who have studied long-term treasure hunters describe a pattern. The deeper the mystery, the more it becomes an identity. The gold train has turned into a mirror for those who pursue it. Each explorer projects onto it what they most desire: validation, purpose, discovery, or escape. It becomes a quest not just through the mountains, but through the self. For the villagers who live near Walbrzich, the legend is both curse and livelihood. Tourists bring income, but also intrusion. Families who once avoided speaking of the war now find their hills crawling with cameras and drills. Some elders whisper that the mountain should never be opened, that it is a tomb. Others shrug and say the world has already taken everything, there is nothing left to lose. In recent years, local historians have begun to reframe the narrative. They argue that even if no gold train ever existed, the myth itself has historical value, a reflection of post-war trauma, the way occupied nations processed the enormity of what had been done to them. In that sense, the story of the gold train is the story of post-war Europe itself, a continent haunted by buried memories, digging endlessly for closure that may never come. There is a strange symmetry in how history repeats this pattern. The same mountains that once hid violence now hide its relics. The same tunnels that once echoed with the sound of forced labor now echo with curiosity and commerce. The same soil that once swallowed lives now conceals stories. Each generation returns to the same ground, asking the same question: what did they leave behind? For some, the answer lies not in the gold, but in the silence. The gold train's endurance as a legend reminds us how powerful absence can be. A sealed tunnel is not just an engineering obstacle, it's a metaphor, a reminder of how much of history remains buried because people choose not to see it. Those who still search the Owl Mountains today often speak of a feeling that cannot be explained by greed. It's a pull, an unease. They describe walking into the tunnels and feeling the weight of the air change, as if the mountain itself remembers what happened. The walls sweat with moisture, but also with memory. In those moments, the gold train stops being an object and becomes a symbol of everything the 20th century tried to bury and could not. And perhaps that's why the story refuses to die. Not because there is gold, but because there is guilt. The idea that the crimes of the past could literally be buried beneath us, locked behind steel and stone, gives shape to a deeper fear, that we still carry those shadows within our civilization. Every new excavation, every announcement, every denial is an attempt to unearth not metal, but truth. In that sense, the gold train is less about discovery and more about confession. Each searcher becomes part of a long ritual, the ritual of remembrance disguised as adventure. The treasure may never exist in a physical sense, but it exists symbolically as the weight of everything stolen, hidden, and denied. So the story endures, passed from witnesses to journalists to dreamers to algorithms. It changes shape, but never disappears. It is the ghost of history refusing to be forgotten, the echo of an empire that collapsed under its own delusions of eternity. And as long as that echo remains, people will keep digging, through the archives, through the tunnels, through their own conscience, looking for an answer that may never come. Today, the Owl Mountains stand silent. Dense forests cover the slopes where armies once marched, and the entrances to Project Reese's tunnels lie hidden beneath moss and debris. To the untrained eye, they are nothing more than scars of geology, depressions in the earth, cracks in the rock. But for those who know the legend, every shadow, every hollow, feels like the edge of a secret. 80 years have passed since that April night in 1945 when the last trains rolled through Silesia. The front lines have long dissolved into history books, yet the echoes of that chaos remain trapped in stone. The towns of Walbrzych and Xiaz have learned to live with the myth, even to embrace it. To outsiders, it's a mystery waiting to be solved. To locals, it's simply part of the landscape, a whisper in the mountains that never fades. Researchers continue to work quietly, far from headlines and speculation. Teams from Polish and German universities still analyze radar data, soil density, and tunnel integrity. Occasionally, a new reading surfaces, an unexplained cavity, a magnetic anomaly, but the results are always inconclusive. Officially, the government maintains that there is no credible evidence of a buried train. Unofficially, some of the same researchers admit that the data is not complete enough to rule anything out. There are still those who believe the train lies buried somewhere between Siaz Castle and the rail junction near Walbrzych. They argue that the Nazis had both the motive and the means. They had the engineering capacity, the manpower, and above all, the desperation. They built underground fortresses larger than entire towns in less than 2 years. Hiding a single armored train would have been trivial by comparison. Skeptics counter that the logistics alone would have been impossible under the conditions of 1945, the fuel shortages, the collapsing infrastructure, the advancing Soviet lines. They say the gold train is not buried treasure, but buried propaganda, born from confusion, rumor, and the chaos of defeat. To them, the story survives because people need it to. And perhaps both are right, because whether the train exists beneath the mountain or only in the imagination, its presence is undeniable. It has shaped lives, economies, and collective memory. It has turned an obscure corner of Poland into a crossroads of myth and history. It has transformed simple tunnels into symbols, not just of hidden gold, but of hidden guilt. In 2016, a historian at the University of Wrocław summarized the enigma in a single sentence: "Even if the gold train is never found, it has already been discovered." In our minds, that statement captures what decades of investigation have revealed: that the legend endures not because of evidence, but because of need. Humanity cannot resist the idea that somewhere, beneath layers of earth and time, lies proof that history still has secrets. The fascination endures because the story sits at the intersection of morality and mystery. It reminds us that beneath the ruins of war are not just the remains of empires, but the traces of choices, greed, fear, ambition, survival. The gold train, real or imagined, forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that the past is never truly buried. It waits quietly in the dark until someone comes looking again. There is also something almost poetic about the setting. The Owl Mountains, with their mist and silence, seem designed for secrets. In winter, fog rolls through the valleys like breath over the sleeping earth. In summer, the air hums with insects and the smell of wet pine. Somewhere beneath those trees, thousands of forced laborers once carved tunnels into the bedrock, their names erased, their work unfinished. The legend of the gold train keeps them from being forgotten. It turns their suffering into a mystery that refuses to disappear. And so, the question remains, not just where the train is, but why we keep looking for it. Maybe it's because people need to believe that history still hides something extraordinary, that the last great secret of the war lies waiting for discovery. Or maybe it's because the search itself has become the treasure, a ritual that gives meaning to the ruins of a century that promised progress and delivered catastrophe. Every few years, a new rumor emerges, a new radar scan, a new anomaly. Each time, the media descends on Walbrzych. Each time, officials caution restraint. And each time, when the excitement fades, the mountain remains exactly as it was, silent, patient, withholding. If the gold train exists, it may one day be found by accident, a shift in the earth, a collapsed tunnel, a mining project uncovering something long forgotten. If it does not, it will still remain one of the most enduring mysteries of modern history, proof that even in an age of satellites and algorithms, there are still places where the past can hide. Perhaps that is its true power, not the promise of gold, but the persistence of mystery. The reminder that history is never fully written, that every nation carries its own sealed tunnels beneath the surface of memory. The story of the Nazi gold train is the story of humanity's relationship with its own past, buried, denied, romanticized, yet never entirely gone. It's a reminder that beneath every legend lies a truth, even if that truth is only this: that we are drawn irresistibly to the darkness we cannot see. And so the mountain waits. The soil settles. The radar hums quietly in the fields outside Walbersich. No one can say for certain what lies beneath, but the world keeps listening for the sound of steel on stone, for the faint, impossible echo of a train that may still be waiting to arrive.